Welcome to a new video. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. The first story is called, "You Should Not Have Done That." There are some fairly serious laws regarding concrete waste, especially the water used to wash down after a job. As a result, contractors are generally required to provide some kind of container for the mixer trucks to clean their chutes into. This can range from something as simple as a wheelbarrow all the way to purpose-built pits and steel containers. Because they are the ones paying for them, some contractors get downright proprietary about people using their washouts. They are very rarely labeled, nor do they ever bother to tell the drivers until they are in the process of washing down. There is a contractor we work with on tilt-ups. Pours for the slab and walls are high volume, going anywhere from 500 to 1,200 cubic yards. As a result, they build their own washouts. Normally, there is no issue with using them, since they are the general contractor, and all work with the subcontractors is for their site. Every so often, however, you end up on a site where the super is an absolute jerk about it. Two of our drivers, Sue and Les, were on the last two loads for a curb machine. It's a big, tracked machine that takes extremely dry concrete in one side and squeezes a fully formed curb out the back, like a Play-Doh extruder. Because the concrete is so dry and the work so slow, it completely messes up the insides of the drums. Once the job is done, all the driver cares about is getting water on those fins and washing as much of that stuff off as possible. Sue finishes first and, like the drivers before her, washes out in one of these wood washouts. About the time she finishes up, Les arrives to do the same. It is at this point that the super jerk shows up. Sue has just gotten into her truck at the far washout. She's a slight woman in her late middle age that looks something like your favorite aunt. Sue is something of a den mother to the rest of the plant. Everybody loves Sue. Les is just starting to wash down at the near washout. He's 6.5 feet tall, hasn't seen 25 stone since before I started driving, and looks like he might just tie your legs in a knot once he remembers the difference between granny and square. 3 guesses which one the jerk goes after. He walks around Les' truck to confront Sue and starts yelling at her for using his washout. Sue points out that nobody had told him the washout was not for subcontractor use, nor had anyone said anything to any of the other drivers on the job, which had been going for hours. He doesn't care. He points behind her truck and says, "Let me make this simple. You only use that washout when you are working directly for me. Is that too hard to understand?" Then he asks if she's already washed out into his bin, which he can clearly see she has. When she confirms this, he starts swearing at her, calling her names and threatening to file a complaint with corporate. To her credit, Sue doesn't respond, and, thankfully for the jerk, Les, who was still washing out, unmolested, right behind him is an absolute teddy bear. So they head back to the plant and find out from Bob, the manager, that the guy actually did call corporate to complain. Nothing came of it, but it made the rest of us mad all the more so, as the story spreads throughout the plant. Sue is willing to let things go. She's no pushover. But she has been in the business long enough not to care that some kid got his panties in a twist. The thing is, though, den mothers have dens, and just because Mama Bear is willing to let things slide doesn't mean you haven't bought yourself a whole den's worth of malicious compliance. They didn't realize it at first, because they weren't doing anything super big. But everyone who went onto that site made a point of only using the far washout. After all, that was what we had been told to do. It was a minor thing, but it meant that instead of detailing a crew to break up and rebuild the washouts once they both filled, they had to send them out more often because one was regularly overflowing. It was simple and petty for a couple of weeks. Then we got scheduled for over 1,000 yards of paving. Paving jobs go in the middle of the night, so there are no issues with traffic, and the trucks show up at a steady rate. They also move at high speed, emptying out a truck in a couple of minutes. We slammed that far washout. They had built a couple more to help with the expected volume of trucks, but the only time someone touches the other washouts is when there are already 3 or 4 trucks on our designated one. After all, we had been told explicitly to only use it. Water is getting everywhere, as it does normally. But it is all concentrated around the one washout, and that area is getting churned up into a sticky bog of sucking mud, and we are starting to track it out onto the street. Usually, washouts are partially filled up, then dry out overnight before being used again. By the time they get full, much of the material inside them has hardened. That's not happening here. Our washout is getting more than triple the use they had planned. It is getting fuller than they had expected. And most of it is water, putting pressure on the walls of the box. We're getting into the home stretch when the plywood finally gives way, and the washout dumps several hundred gallons of water onto the dirt. Now, of course, we can't comply with the super's directions anymore. So we start alternating between the remaining washouts, like normal. Meanwhile, the water from the busted washout has transformed the entire area into the swamps of sadness, and what started as the odd, muddy tire mark across the asphalt is rapidly becoming a thick layer of clay, laminated across the street. by the time the jerk gets in, it's a complete disaster. He can't tell what happened since the busted washout had dumped all its water, and the others are now being used. It looks like the thing just broke. The dirt on the road is a serious problem that could get the contractor fined. It has to be taken care of immediately. He has to hire a street sweeper to clean things up, and, since there are other jobs on the site later that day, he has to keep the sweeper out there until the mud has dried out enough that we aren't constantly tracking it. The next story is called, "But That Is Too Much Work." This story comes from my previous job at a retail paint store. Honestly, it was a great place to work. Customers are generally friendly and the pay was all right. The store I was working at during this story dealt almost exclusively with general and painting contractors. Roughly 95% of our business came from people we saw 2 or 3 times daily, so we knew most people on a first-name basis. This story is about the other 5%. A young woman comes into the store alone and heads over to the section with the wood stains. Not uncommon, I just think she's looking for color samples to give to her builder or something like that. It's the weekend, so we're not too busy. After a minute or two, I go over and ask if I can help with anything. "Good morning, can I help you find anything?" "Actually, maybe you can. I'm looking to stain a wine rack I just bought, and I'm not sure exactly what steps need to be taken to do it." This is very typical of doing-it-yourself customers, and I actually like helping in these situations, so I have a whole speech prepared on what to do in what order. For those curious, because she's staining the wood, we need the wood to be bare in order to stain. "Yes, of course. Is it bare wood or has it been coated before?" "It's currently stained. It's something close to a brown wood color right now." "That's actually my favorite stain color, but it's pretty dark." "What color were you thinking of changing it to?" "Probably something like oak." Now, I'm not sure if you've tried to use a penetrating stain before, but going to lighter is a huge pain in the rear. You basically have to sand off the lacquer, sand off the sealer underneath it, then sand down to the natural color of the wood. Keep in mind this is a wine rack, so it's not a lot of large open flat surface. So this will take some serious time and effort. Doing my job, let her know that this will be a project and explain step by step what she needs to do in order to change the color of the stain. She just said, "No." And I was speechless. I politely ask, "I'm sorry ma'am, what?" "No, that's too much work. I think I'll just stain on top of the finish." "Ma'am, it's called a penetrating stain for a reason. It needs to go directly on the wood so it can penetrate into it. Look, I don't need you to try to sell me a bunch of stuff I won't need. Just the stain, please. If you want it to be fewer steps, you could paint on top of it. You won't get that wood look, however." She was getting impatient. "Do you want me to go to that department store down the street and spend money there?" "No ma'am, I just want to make sure your finished product looks good and stays that way. Then sell me this stain." Now, this is the part where I need to cover myself for when she comes back in 3 days saying the stain didn't work and I lied to her. This happened before. I flag down my coworker and make up some excuse as to why I need her to ring the lady up. For every line in a sale, there is a comments section that saves in the system but doesn't print on the receipt. Since she listened to our entire conversation, she can put the comment in saying, "He explained the correct process for stripping and staining. Advise ignored. Told to sell stain anyway." Sure enough, later that week, the lady comes in ranting and raving about our terrible product and crappy customer service. She immediately recognizes me as the one who helped her and starts throwing insults towards me and the store in general. "I'm very sorry ma'am, let me get the manager up here and he can take care of you, alright? Just go. Hopefully, he knows more than the rest of you people." As I come back with the manager, he asked, "What seems to be the problem?" This guy told me all I needed to do was throw the stain on and it would work. "Of course, let me just pull up your order and we can get you a full refund." He starts typing. Well, I see here that my other employee working that day agrees with him, and claims that he did in fact tell you how to do this correctly. That being said, would you like me to help you pick out everything you would need for this? She ended up saying something about going to that hardware store and how they would help her. I couldn't really hear because I was laughing to myself in the back room. You asked for my advice and I gave it. Just because you don't like it doesn't make it wrong. The last story is called, "Hold On, Let Me Get You Fired First." I worked as a network admin at a food processing plant. This happened a few days ago when my coworker approached me after working on the floor, informing me of how Kevin approached him in regards to mobile scanners that he said he needs ready by today. Mobile scanners that, for starters, we do not have available, but I'll explain that in a moment. First, let me tell you a little about Kevin so you know exactly what I'm dealing with here. Kevin is this company's plant manager and he's, for a lack of a better term, abrasive. If I can describe him better, he's the type of manager that loves to micromanage his employees while demanding the most out of every and anyone when he feels that he needs something important done. This is where our situation came in. Long story short, Kevin wanted the scanner that shipping mainly uses for inventory to be used by his employees to track pallets to ensure that they are accurate. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, I thought so too, even if he had that out the blue. Well, as I soon found out that day, things soon escalated the way that they did, and while I wished things were handled better, I did things the best that I could do in the end, so there aren't any real regrets here. So steering back to the situation, Kevin told my coworker that the other 2 scanners, because the company only had 3, were either broken or unaccountable. That obviously didn't sit well with either of us, because now, to remedy that, he wanted the scanner we had on reserve for a special project to be used for his project. My coworker recorded the conversation and asked if I can step in to talk with him, so I did. Walking to the area Kevin was in, I can see that I wasn't alone, not that it really mattered since my business was with him. I addressed Kevin the situation with the scanner, and, per our policy, we must determine the status of the scanner, why one is broken and why the other is missing. How broken is it? Why was there no better accountability made for our assets, etc. Kevin, in his own fashion, didn't have an answer for me, but instead told me to go ask whoever had the scanner and find out why. I looked at him and asked him, "Sir, isn't this your project? Shouldn't you be able to held accountable since the equipment was under your care at the time?" Obviously, Kevin somehow took offense to that, as he felt that I was being disrespectful and that how dare I put him on the spot like that. So, as always, in situations like this, I decided to call my boss and inform him of the situation and asked for his input. Putting my phone on speaker, my boss informed Kevin that he cannot accommodate what he wants, simply because we do not have what he wants, nor can it be done the same day. Kevin then suggested the scanner that we have reserved for that special project. My boss obviously told him no, as he will not be allocating assets for a project to fill his needs. Kevin tried to dispute this, saying that he wanted this done that day. My boss said, and I quote this happily, "Well, if you had enough foresight to inform us of this project sooner, we would have been able to accommodate you better." Keep in mind that per our policy, should the plant have any and all projects that will involve IT-related assets and/or information, it must be coordinated with the IT department prior to deployment to ensure a seamless transition. You didn't, and therefore you have to accept the consequences as someone in management should. Keep in mind also that prior to calling my boss, I was also recording my conversation with Kevin because it is absolutely essential to have proof. I then proceeded to resume recording, giving Kevin the illusion that I was hanging up with my boss, which I did, but he didn't need to know all the details. I then asked Kevin if there was anything else he needed from me, to which he had a bit of a grump and told me that he found me to be very unreasonable, basically saying that I wasn't doing my job properly and that if it were up to him, he would fire me on the spot for being so incompetent. Sure Kevin, keep feeding me that delicious info. So, I went back to my office to see what I can wrap upon for the day when I got a call from my human resource manager to report to her office. You all already know where this is going, but we're coming to the conclusion here, so buckle up. So I walk in there and sure enough, Kevin is there too with a smug look on his face. My human resource manager told me that Kevin informed her that he found my conduct with him to be very disrespectful and that I refused to accommodate him with what he needed or gave a valid excuse why. It's no surprise here, but I was ready for this. Prior to even showing up, I had my coworker email me the recording he had with Kevin since, by that time, he had left work and went home. Along with my recordings, I had what I needed. But I wanted to put the cherry on top. So after a quick text to my boss, he showed up with the most serious expression I've seen him in. Keep in mind also that he was supposed to be starting his vacation, and getting dragged in for Kevin's crap did not sit well with him. So after Kevin said his piece and I said mine, the human resource manager turned to me and said, "Do you have any evidence that dismisses Kevin's accusations?" With the most professional looking smug look on my face, I told her that I did. So I pulled out my phone and pulled up the 2 recordings that both my coworker and I had with our conversation with Kevin. So after listening to the conversations, Kevin's expression went from smug to as if he saw a ghost. Without much to say, the human resource manager turned to Kevin and told him, "How can you even say such a thing to someone here? He has been one of our most dedicated workers here. Being in the job that he's in, he has a lot on his plate to contend with. It is also a policy that his manager enforces that they do not keep surplus equipment if it is not meant to be utilized to its fullest extent. That is why we order through them to supply exactly what we need. Your conduct towards him does not merit any actual justification through your callous words and berating him in the manner that you took." Afterward, I stepped out with my boss while the human resource manager doles out what she felt was necessary to Kevin. Not long afterwards, he left her office without saying a word to either my boss or I. Going back into her office, we were told that Kevin had already had a history of this sort of thing happening, but without any substantial evidence, they couldn't make a thing against him. We did, and it was more than enough along with the paper trail stacked against him to get him fired. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.